The argument synthesis. The argument synthesis. The entire point of an argument is to persuade your reader that a particular and debatable claim is true. Therefore, it must present a debatable point. Writers argue to establish facts, to make statements of value, and to recommend policies and solutions. The extent to which the reader accepts these findings depends on the quality of the supporting evidence and the care with which the writer has argued his or her case. The argument synthesis draws upon evidence from a variety of sources in an attempt to persuade others of the truth or validity of a debatable claim. So how is an explanatory synthesis different from an argument synthesis? The explanatory synthesis, like what we saw when we wrote our essays about the introduction to fairy tales, is a fairly modest in its purpose. It emphasizes the sources, not the writer's use of sources. So it's not how many people say the same thing that you wanted, it's just what was said. So an example of explanatory thesis would be, cell phones make it possible for us to be always within reach, though many people would prefer not to be always within reach. Turning that into an argumentative thesis, cell phones have ruined our ability to be isolated, to be willfully out of touch with the rest of the world. What mostly changes these two statements and makes one argumentative and the other one just an explanation is the verbs. So cell phones make it possible. And this one, cell phones have ruined. Ruined is obviously much stronger than make. Also, when you say prefer not to be within reach or willfully out of touch, to not be in reach and to be out of touch have certain connotations. The stronger language is certainly the argumentative. The elements of an argument. There are three parts to an argument: the claim, the support, and the assumption or warrant. The claim is what you are trying to prove. The thinking process that moves you from a topic to a defensible position calls for you to first make a claim. The exact wording of the claim does not find its way into your essay, but it serves as a focus for your thinking and your writing. So here's a topic: commercialization of the holidays. You've got two possible claims. The holidays have become too commercialized, or the holidays have not become too commercialized. Both of these are debatable, and it gives you a starting point for what to write about. Then you must support that claim, and the support is exactly how you would prove the claim. Use statements of fact, statistics, or expert opinion. The support helps prove your point. And this is when you go back to primary and secondary sources to prove your claim and persuade your reader. So the difference between a primary source and a secondary source: primary is exactly what you're talking about now. Secondary is what you're pulling things from. So if you're going to be writing an essay on Hamlet, your primary sources are actually going to come from Hamlet. Your secondary sources would come from literary articles written about Hamlet. Linking your supporting evidence to your claim is your assumption about the topic. This was also discussed in Chapter 2, but it was referred to as a warrant. Usually it's called an assumption. This book is the first one I have heard of where it's referred to as a warrant. Assumptions are the underlying beliefs or principles about some aspect of the world and how it operates. Assumptions are generally more general than claims and supporting evidence. So let's look at some examples. So here's a claim. High school students should be restricted to no more than 2 hours of TV viewing per day. Support. An important new study and the testimony of educational specialists reveal that students who watch more than 2 hours of TV a night might have, on average, lower grades than those who watch less TV. So the support is further explaining why the claim is valid. The assumption: excessive TV viewing adversely affects academic performance. Most people already agree to that. And everything from the claim and the support also supports this assumption. Because if you're watching more than 2 hours of TV, it's excessive, and then it adversely affects your academic performance. The formula we use for argument is still what the ancient Greeks used. And this is actually what rhetoric is. So when you register for English 1301, composition and rhetoric, rhetoric is the art of arguing. Aristotle explained how speakers attempting to persuade others to their point of view could achieve their purpose by relying on one or more appeals. And these appeals are logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos is appeal to logic. If you just look at the root of the words log and log, it tells you that logic is in logos. So logos uses logic and evidence. It's most commonly used in academia. And there are two ways to employ logos, through deductive reasoning or inductive reasoning. The basic idea of deductive reasoning is that the writer begins with a generalization, then cites a specific case related to that generalization, from which follows a conclusion. So here's an excerpt from JFK's address to the nation in June 1963. We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and as a people. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is time to act in the Congress, in your state, and local legislative body, and above all in our daily lives. So what Kennedy did in this speech is he cited several things that are going to lead you to a logical conclusion. He's talking about a moral crisis. It can't just be handled by the police. It cannot just be demonstrations. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It's actually got to come down to law. And what he's talking about here is the Civil Rights Amendment. Inductive reasoning. This is exactly the opposite. And this is when the writer argues inductively. He begins not with a generalization, but with several pieces of specific evidence. So let's look at this excerpt from Senator Byrd's address to Congress prior to a debate on gun control. I read of young men being viciously murdered for a pair of sneakers, a leather jacket, or $20. In 1951, there were 3.2 policemen for every felony committed in the United States. This year, nearly 3.2 felonies will be committed per every police officer. Something has to change. We have to stop the crimes that are distorting and disrupting the way of life for so many innocent, law-respecting Americans. The bill that we are debating today attempts to do just that. Now here comes the tough part. Statistics can be stacked one way or the other to make one side of an argument appear more credible. So for example, we've all seen the Colgate or Crest commercials, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend. All you have to do is find 4 dentists that recommend and 1 that doesn't, and you've got a statistic of 4 out of 5. This process is called card stacking, and it is a type of logical fallacy. But this does not negate the argument. Instead, it puts more responsibility on the reader. Everything you read must be read critically. So for example, if you see something on the internet, you may or may not believe it right off the top of your head, and you go through a certain process to decide whether or not it's credible. Who wrote it, where you found it, and so on. Ethos is the ethical appear. So you see the root etho, you've got ethic here. It's not based on the ethics relating to the subject under debate. It is based on the ethical status of the person making the argument. So the writer must have a certain degree of credibility, good character, have sound sense, be qualified to argue based on either expert evidence with the subject matter or on carefully conducted research. This is where you establish your credibility as a reader, right here. Okay. The reader cannot necessarily tell if you have sound sense or if you have good character, but they can tell by the quality of your research and how you've incorporated that research into your essay whether or not you are ethical. So how do you, as the academic writer, establish the credibility? Develop presentations that are well organized. So a lot of your academic career up to this point has talked about developing or organizing essays, how to write outlines, how to make speeches. And it's all been gearing up to help you make the choice to provide carefully reasoned arguments. There's been a lot of emphasis, especially in this class, on thoroughly referencing your source with citations. So this citing sources in an essay does not go away in college at any point. It only actually gets more. These are hallmarks of writers who care deeply about their work. It's most often seen in political debates or current issues. So if you are in a speech class, for example, you'll run up against this several times. If you're taking philosophy, you'll have to analyze things this way. In academic writing, appeals to ethos are most obvious in the structure of your essay. If you do not have a well-structured essay, and you do not have quotes incorporated that really do support your purpose, then you haven't written a good essay and your ethics come into question. The last one is pathos, and this is an appeal to emotion. So when you think about pathos, think about empathy or sympathy. It's the same root, path. Academic writers rely heavily on logic and evidence and rarely employ pathos. There's nothing wrong with appealing to emotions, but it must be done carefully, and pathos cannot be the only basis of the argument. Okay, so let's look at this example from Ronald Reagan's first inaugural address. He was referencing the view. Referencing the view from the Capitol to Arlington National Cemetery. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barbershop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There, on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure, I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. The crisis we are facing today does not require of us the kind of sacrifice that Martin Treptow and so many thousands of others were called upon to make. It does require, however, our best effort and our willingness to believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds, to believe that together with God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. So this is obviously trying to pull on your sympathy because you've got a real person who sacrificed his life for American ideals. Even though Reagan did not say, you need to feel this way because people have died for your rights or your privileges right now, because this story makes you feel that way, that is an appeal to pathos. The limits of argument. Arguments are not won on the basis of logic and evidence alone. I wish they were, but they're not. In the real world, arguments are not scholarly debates. If the purpose of an argument is to change a person's feelings toward a subject or to have the reader agree with the writer, then the writer must be aware that factors other than logic and evidence come into play. These factors involve cultural, religious, ethnic, racial, and gender identities, moral preferences, and the effects of personal experiences. So basically, remember, you are not writing in a bubble. Your preferences and your beliefs and the ones held by our culture come into play also.